Hello everyone, I am Casey the Gamer, and it's time for another game review. So back when I reviewed Super Castlevania 4, I said that I had never beaten any of the NES games, and I threw down a challenge to those games. Well, now it's time to take on Castlevania for the NES. Castlevania was developed by Konami and released on September 26, 1986 in Japan, and on May 1st, 1987 in North America. As I mentioned in my Super Castlevania 4 review, I had both that game and this one growing up, and I played them a lot, but I never made much progress. I think as a kid I might have made it as far as stage 3 in this game. I can't quite remember that. Despite its difficulty, I always loved the style and the gameplay of this game. And for this review, I have finally beaten Castlevania for the NES. Now let's take a closer look at it. Simon Belmont, wielder of the Vampire Killer Whip and member of the Belmont family, a family that specializes in killing monsters, is tasked with entering Dracula's castle and putting an end to the vampire. But before Simon reaches Dracula, he must make his way through the castle and battle a variety of horrible creatures like giant bats, Medusa, a pair of mummies, Frankenstein's monster, death, and then finally Dracula himself. After a long and crazy journey, Simon finally confronts Dracula. Simon and Dracula battle, and Simon manages to defeat him. Dracula then transforms into a monstrous second form. Simon defeats the monster once and for all with his whip, and Dracula's castle crumbles. Castlevania is a 2D action platformer. You play as Simon Belmont, who is armed with his trusty whip, the Vampire Killer. You'll be running or strutting your way through the stages. Seriously, look at him go. It's a strut. You'll also be jumping over obstacles and whipping all manner of crazy enemies to death. Enemies such as zombies, skeletons, fishmen, Medusa heads, ghosts, and Axemen, to name a few, as well as all of the bosses I mentioned in the story section. The Vampire Bat, Medusa, the Mummy Men, Frankenstein's monster, Death, and Dracula. So when you start the game, you have the standard leather whip, but breaking the candles and such will reward you with the Morning Star upgrade, which has 2 stages of upgrades. The first stage gives you a short chain whip that does more damage, and the second stage also does more damage, and it gives you a longer chain whip. If you die, you lose the upgrade, but they're very easily obtained again. In addition to the Vampire Killer Whip, there are several sub-weapons. These include the Watch, which freezes time, the Dagger, which is a super fast projectile thrown in front of you, the Axe is a projectile thrown in an arc, and it does pretty good damage. The Holy Water, which will break open on the ground and burn enemies in its path. And finally, my personal favorite, the Boomerang Cross, which is thrown out in front of you and comes back. It can hit enemies multiple times. For your sub-weapons, you are able to obtain the double and triple shots. The double shot allows you to throw 2 of your sub-weapon, and the triple shot allows you to throw 3 of your sub-weapon. These do not work with the Watch. In addition to the Morning Star upgrade and the sub-weapons, there are several items that you'll come across on your journey. Small hearts and big hearts are used as weapon ammo for your sub-weapons. You can never have too many of those. The cross is a screen nuke. It'll kill any enemy on screen when you touch it. There's an invincibility potion, which makes you invincible for a limited time. The money bags increase your score, which will lead to you getting 1-ups. The iconic pork chop or wall meat is used to refill your health. And then the magic crystal is dropped by the stage boss and it refills your health to max before you move on to the next stage. Speaking of stages, Castlevania has a total of 6 stages with 3 levels per stage. When you get to the next level of the stage, that acts as your checkpoint if you die. But if you game over, then you start back at the very beginning of the stage. With the exception of the final stage. If you make it to Dracula, you will start outside of his room no matter how many times you game over, because despite its difficulty, Castlevania is merciful and gives you unlimited continues. Castlevania's 6 stages are mostly fun. They start off relatively easy. Even when the Medusa heads start showing up in stage 2, it's not an issue. Anyway, stage 1 through 3 are a nice fun platforming adventure where you battle the vampire bat, Medusa, and the mummy men. Stage 4 through 6 ramps up the difficulty quite a bit. There's plenty of opportunities for the enemies to get the better of you, or for you to be knocked into a bottomless pit via the classic Castlevania knockback. Granted, that can happen in the first half of the game as well, it's just not as bad there. At least not for me. Stage 4 through 6 will see you battling Frankenstein's monster, Death, and Dracula. Even with Stage 4 ramping the difficulty up, it's still perfectly manageable. And even the majority of Stage 5 is just fine. That is, until you get to the notorious hallway right before Death. It features 2 axemen, which wouldn't be an issue on their own, but the hallway is also crawling with Medusa heads. You can use the watch sub-weapon to make it easier to get through, but it has no effect on Death at all. So fighting him whip only is quite an ordeal. Plus his scythes can still kill you after you beat him. If you can reach Death with the boomerang cross, you'll have a much better time. The final bit before Dracula is a romp through the dreaded clock tower, which surprisingly wasn't too bad in this game, at least for me. I was quite surprised. Then the fight with Dracula begins, and I'm honestly not sure which fight is harder, him or Death. They both gave me the most trouble for sure, but Dracula having 2 forms does make it a bit harder, I suppose. His first form is definitely harder than his second. Try to get his pattern down, and then reach into the very depths of your gaming ability to defeat his first form and still have a decent amount of health for round 2. Dracula transforms into a giant monster and can easily kill you, especially if you're drained from round 1. But I had a way easier time with this phase. Use the holy water on him. It doesn't actually damage him, but it will stun him, giving you a chance to get away from him or lay on the pain with the vampire killer. And just like that, Dracula has been defeated. Overall, Castlevania is fun as hell. It's mostly difficult, but fair. That damn hallway before Death is definitely my least favorite part of the game. That and the classic knockback. But the game is fair in a lot of instances that other old school games just weren't. Unlimited continues is a huge plus in any game, and especially in a hard-as-nails retro game. The checkpoints during the stages are also nice and pretty fair. And of course, starting you outside of Dracula's room every time after you reach it. Castlevania features some fantastic 8-bit pixel art graphics. It's a wonderful looking NES game. The character sprites and backgrounds all look great. No complaints at all. The sound effects and soundtrack are just pure nostalgia for me. All of the sound effects fit the game perfectly. Again, no complaints. And more about the soundtrack. The soundtrack is really damn good. Every song in this game is so good. Every single one has me grooving and bopping my head as I battle the forces of darkness. That being said, Vampire Killer is the best tune in the game, hands down. So good. Castlevania is a classic, and for good reason. It's so much fun, even with all of the difficult parts. It was such a huge part of my childhood, and I'm glad I can finally say that I've beaten it. Strutting through the stages and battling the enemies and all the crazy bosses is such a good time. If you want a fun, old-school platformer, I definitely recommend Castlevania. But if this one is a little too hard, give Super Castlevania 4 a shot. It's still hard, but it's a much smoother experience overall. But to me, you can't go wrong with either one. The next time I cover Castlevania, it'll be Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. We'll see how that one goes. Thank you all so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And if you want to see more of me, you can catch me streaming all kinds of stuff over on my Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/CaseyTheGamer91. And I also have a Patreon, where you can get perks like early video access and some other cool stuff. And that is patreon.com/CaseyTheGamer91. You can find both of those links and all of my other links in the description below. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope to catch you next time. Peace out.